Video games have collectively agreed on one thing. Falling is completely fine until it suddenly isn't. You can fall from a slightly too high ledge and instantly die, but 1 inch lower and you're hardly even hurt. That raises an important question. Who decided this, and why on earth does it feel normal? My initial hypothesis is that fall damage in games is about control and pacing, not physics or realism. Let's find out how wrong I am. So if we start with the fundamentals, in real life gravity is pretty simple. You go up, you come down, and your legs would prefer if you didn't. It's kind of it. Newton figured out gravity and left it to the game devs to decide when it matters. There's no health bar, no warning, no, quote, you are now entering the danger zone, unquote. There's just the consequences of your own actions in the event that you decide to see if you can fly. There are other games that have similar systems, but I'm going to be taking Minecraft as the guinea pig for this. Minecraft has a very clear system. You can fall a certain distance and be completely fine. A little bit further and you take some damage, and a little bit further than that, suddenly you're dead. Mathematically, it's basically damage is the distance fallen -3, which means that you can fall 3 blocks and not take any damage. The game has sort of decided that there's a very specific height where your legs stop working, but Minecraft gives you ways around it. Further falling enchantments reduce damage, and there are slow falling potions that let you survive bigger drops by literally slowing you down. Then there's obviously the famous clutch mechanics. Water buckets, slime blocks, hay bales, ladders, beds, etc. These are objects that realistically shouldn't be saving you. Regardless, they do, and it could be argued that that's a good thing, because it turns out that it turns falling from punishment into a skill. Now, comparing that to Terraria, Terraria also has fall damage, but it's handled a little bit differently. The numbers scale more aggressively, and instead of simple, predictable outcomes, you get something that feels a little less forgiving. Excuse me. But here's the difference. In Minecraft, avoiding fall damage is essential. In Terraria, it becomes less important over time. This is mainly because in Minecraft, obviously you get enchantments that reduce your damage, but you can never completely negate it. But in Terraria, you eventually get things like wings, double jumps, hooks, and accessories like the lucky horseshoe. So instead of mastering the system, you slowly outgrow it because you just don't take fall damage at that point. And even the Minecraft-esque clutch is at endgame because you need the bottomless water bucket, and that's not viable. So to compare the two, Minecraft sort of says, learn this, master it, and use it everywhere. The downside to that is that once players learn them, they become standard. Water bucket clutches are now considered tame and routine now. Just think back to 10 years ago, water clutch MLGs were all the rave. But now, players are pressured to make more and more complex clutches because the initial system has now been solved. Fall damage is no longer considered a real risk and more of a solution to a problem. But Terraria says, survive this until you don't have to anymore. And both approaches work for very different reasons. They clearly work because these games are very, very popular. So, when it comes to actually, looking at real life physics, imagine if, in real life, you fell 9.9 meters and you were completely fine. But at 10.1 meters, your spine decided to let go. That's kind of how games work, but not really how reality works. In real life, falling depends on lots of factors. The height you fall from, your mass, how you land, the surface you land on, and something called terminal velocity, which is a fancy way of saying that you don't accelerate downwards forever, as eventually the air resistance balances with gravity and you stop speeding up. There's a very, very complex equation that I'm not going to try and say out loud, but it involves the mass of the thing falling, the gravity on the planet, basically, that you're on, and you multiply all that by 2, you divide it by the density, the frontal area, and the drag coefficient, and then you square root all of it. So the frontal area is, say you've got an object falling down, and the area, say it's a cube, and the area of one face is 12 meters squared. The frontal area is therefore 12 meters squared. And then the drag coefficient, I'll probably not try and define it right now because I don't have one written in my notes, but it's just something that each thing has, but I'll put it on the screen. So I did calculations wrong there actually. I'm going to have to edit this in post, but you're going to see the terminal velocities of different different falling positions. So prone, which is where you're in a skydiving position with your arms and your legs out, your belly first, and then upright, which is how Minecraft does it. You don't belly flop in Minecraft. You stay upright. So you're going to see the different terminal velocities for both of those positions. The important part is that even at that maximum speed, you're still in quite serious trouble. It's just slightly more consistent trouble because you stay the same speed past a certain point. But the weird bit is that in real life, you can die from very small falls. It's rare, but it happens. You've probably tripped over going up a stair, or missed a step and suddenly you're on the floor. It can also create video game logic moments where you can slay dragons and Cthulhu, but your mortal enemy is a table, because it will trip you up. Realism applied to the games. So, if we did make games realistic, what would it look like? Well, you'd get random injuries, broken limbs, slower movement, long recovery times, and very quickly you'd stop enjoying yourself. Realistic fall damage can work well in games that involve survival, and frustration is the point in that case, but it can also need realistic graphics, shift focus from movement to recovery and consequences, and cause pacing issues. You'd need realistic graphics because of the difference between, a cartoon style game and the realistic, falling and hurting yourself sort of thing, where you realistically have to take care of it, but it's in a very unrealistic art style. And obviously there are pacing issues because you have to take time out of the progression of the game to heal, because you wouldn't be able to run away from enemies as easily. So instead of a clean system, you get randomness, which would be horrible in a game like Minecraft. In a survival game, fall damage creates positive tension, while it creates negative friction in action games. So fall damage is great in a survival game, because the point is to survive, and fall damage makes it so that it's harder to survive. It just creates more challenge. But it creates negative friction in action games because you then have to spend more time outside of the narrative and the plot of the game to heal yourself, and that's not what the game is for, if that makes sense. The difference is whether or not it's intentional that you get frustrated. The point of fall damage is to create a roadblock, or to force the player to consider their movement while playing. So why not make it realistic? Because that would be awful. Imagine playing something like Skyrim, and every time you fall slightly wrong, your character just breaks their leg. Now you move slower, you can't fight properly, and you have to wait to heal. That's realistic, but it's also incredibly boring. Games need to be clear, and you need to understand risk instantly. Fall damage is a form of communication of danger, but it can feel unfair and arbitrary. The system is clear until it isn't. When you feel like you will survive a fall and you don't, it feels like more of a punishment than communication. Oftentimes, players don't know why they even died. That causes frustration, and it makes players less likely to return to the game once they log off. To show that fall damage is used to guide player movement in-game, here's a popular example. Think of Pokemon games where they'll put a random NPC, a tree, or a sleeping Snorlax in the way of a route that they don't want you to have access to yet. Fall damage does that. It stops you from going everywhere immediately, it encourages you to find safer routes, and rewards skill when you bypass it. It creates this really simple system that's high risk and high potential reward. You take a dangerous shortcut, and if it works, you feel clever. That's your dopamine. Dopamine is the reward loop that makes risky movement feel worth repeating, which is great for players and even better for the people selling the game. You can follow that logic all the way to this is designed to keep you playing longer for profit, which it is. Just look at EOM in hero shooters, which is intentionally biased matchmaking where one team will have stronger players than the other. Recently been criticised for backfiring. The lost streaks are proving themselves to encourage rage quitting instead of the goal of motivation. It definitely enables game addiction. However, some would argue that it's also just good game design. Some of it is just making the game fun. The system does keep you playing longer, but that doesn't make it inherently manipulative. It depends on how it's used in that game. Some games don't have fall damage, and that's a very, very good point. Or at the very least, they don't handle them in the same way. Minecraft is predictable, and you usually know if you'll survive a fall or not. This is due to the linear or direct proportionality of height and damage. The graph of Minecraft's fall damage is basically y equals x minus 3, where the y-axis is the damage and the x-axis represents the distance fallen. Other games like the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim can feel way less consistent due to their exponential curves of damage. Sometimes you survive and sometimes you absolutely don't, even when you think you should have. Then you've got games like Portal or Doom, which just completely remove fall damage. This approach, as with any, comes with its upsides and its downsides. Some of the pros of no fall damage include the lack of stress, more mobility options, freedom, level design can be more varied in vertical terrain, and it enables speedrunning tech and fast-paced plays. Wow, I didn't think of that when I wrote the script. The cons of no fall damage include that it sort of shifts the risk-reward choices from movement into combat. It could be said that this makes vertical movement too easy in some games. You know, sometimes you want to be thinking about where you are and your positioning, but it doesn't encourage that. If we decide to touch more on the risk and reward choice, if every fall is safe, hype becomes meaningless. It can make it easier to stop worrying about careless movement. Some would say that those games are fun because they don't have fall damage, due to the lack of worry about your positioning. But games such as Neon White and ULTRAKILL would be practically boring without the insane tech that comes from the lack of fall damage. Imagine if you couldn't B-hop in Marvel Rivals. And that's only possible because there's no fall damage. These games rely on speed, flow, and aggression, and fall damage would subtract from that. So yeah, fall damage makes absolutely no sense if you compare it to real life, but that's sort of the point. Games aren't trying to simulate reality in the majority of cases. They're trying to create systems that are clear, fair, and just frustrating enough to keep things interesting. Sometimes that means deciding that there is a very specific height where your legs simply give up. However, it's also important to remember that not all genres of games are suited to fall damage. Yeah, it works great in survival games, but there are all sorts of games that adding fall damage to could really hurt the reception of. In realism, the same game that lets you kill a god will also kill you for missing a step. Fall damage is less about realism or fun, it's more of a restriction on the freedom that you have in a space. According to video games, two nearly identical falls can have completely different results. One will survive and the other will die instantly. The difference is about half a meter and however much control the developer wants. That's been me. Have a nice rest of your day.